The moment is upon us. Pardon me. The moment is upon us. Kairos has arrived. Welcome, everyone, to Victor's Descent. Here today, we will be continuing on with our recording of Victor Frankenstein in his journeys of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And there alongside, we'll be beginning our first venture into an old classic, something that really defined the YouTube and general video makers landscape back whenever it first popped off, Amnesia, The Dark Descent. Now, I recall watching Amnesia back whenever I was a kid on one of the very first channels that I plunged into on YouTube, which was, like many people I'm sure, Markiplier in their early teens. As for me, I do not recall very much of it as a consequence thereof, by the simple fact that it was so very long ago. A lot of what I understand the plot to be, although that is very scarce, is subtextual, and besides that, a lot of Markiplier's point in the series, from what I do remember, was, of course, the reaction to all of the things happening within it, more so than perhaps picking things apart. But, as I say, it has been many years, and so this will be effectively the first venture that I'll have into it of something that has been around and made its waves in its time. So, without further ado, we get on to housekeeping, which will be very brief, as per the last time. Not terribly much to report, aside from the fact that we have fully got all of our shorts up on BitChute and TikTok, and we are now able to synchronize our releases with all of the material there. Aside from that, I believe we have everything taken care of. Oh yes, I will be distributing links and references to various promotional sources here soon, in hopes that I can get more people like yourselves to come and join me in all of these wonderful delvings into the literary and creative, and hopefully into the Discord server, so that we can really begin to foster some more long-form discussions than per se might be able to be accomplished here on YouTube in a comment section or something of the sort. Insofar as the development side of things, we have made some pretty significant strides on the Panatrivium, the TTRPG that I've been working on, as some of you longtime watchers will have recognized from my various, what would you call them, presentations, lectures, on the developmental aspects of late. The Panatrivium standard model, which we did get a look at back whenever it was quite significantly different, before I had really refined a lot of the philosophic and metaphysic ideas that underlie it, are now making some substantial reformation, and that will aid not only in its logic consistency, but also in its readability, for someone especially who is not elbows deep in all of this technic jargon and the lot. But that all being said, let us then get into Frankenstein. And let's see here. Yes, perfect. Part 3 of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Read by Kairos of the Threefold Manifold. January 7th, 2025. Chapter 5. It was on... Despite my best efforts, I have been still producing quite a few mouth noises. I'm trying to find a remedy for that, but despite the fact that I've more than got my microphone off to the side, and beyond the average range. It's still picking up quite a few. I think it might be the sensitivity, but nonetheless. Chapter 5. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 in the morning. The rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature. Open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. And I did look up some more details. Part of that, the clickiness might have been the coffee. Today I'm having some rooibos, South African plant, a tisane, and some cocoa and rosé. I mean to say actual rose. Not quite the wine. How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe? Or how delineate the wretch whom with such infinite pains and care? Or how delineate the wretch whom with such infinite pains and care I had endeavored to form? His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful! Great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black, flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness. But these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness, but these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes, that seemed almost of the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips. The different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feelings of human nature. I had worked hard for nearly 2 years, for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this, I had deprived myself of rest and health. I desired it with an ardor that far exceeded moderation. But now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room, and continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep. At length, lassitude succeeded to the tumult I had before endured, and I threw myself on the bed in my clothes, endeavoring to seek a few moments of forgetfulness. But it was in vain. I slept, indeed, but I was disturbed by the wildest dreams. I thought I saw Elizabeth, in the bloom of health, walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. Delighted and surprised, I embraced her, but as I imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became livid with the hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought that I held the corpse of my dead mother in my arms. A shroud enveloped her form, and I saw the grave worms crawling in the folds of the flannel. I started from my sleep with horror. A cold dew covered my forehead. My teeth chattered, and every limb became convulsed, when, by the dim and yellow light of the moon, as it forced its way through the window shutters, I beheld the wretch, the miserable monster whom I had created. He held up the curtain of the bed, and his eyes, if eyes they may be called, were fixed on me. His jaw opened, and he muttered some inarticulate sounds, while a grin wrinkled his cheeks. I might have spoken, but I did not hear. One hand was stretched out, seemingly to detain me, but I escaped, and I rushed downstairs. I took refuge in the courtyard belonging to the house which I inhabited, where I remained during the rest of the night, walking up and down in the greatest agitation, listening attentively, catching and fearing each sound as if it were to announce the approach of the demoniacal corpse to which I had so catching and fearing each sound as if it were to announce the approach of the demoniacal corpse to which I had so miserably given life. Oh! No mortal could support the horror of that countenance. A mummy again endued with animation could not be so hideous as that wretch. I had gazed on him while unfinished. He was ugly then, but when those muscles and joints were rendered capable of motion, it became a thing such as even Dante could not have conceived. I passed the night wretchedly. Sometimes my pulse beat so quickly and hardly that I felt the palpitation of every artery. At others, I nearly sank to the ground through languor and extreme weakness. Mingled with this horror, I felt the bitterness of disappointment. Dreams that had been my food and pleasant rest for so long a space were now become a hell to me. The change was so rapid, the overthrow so complete. Morning, dismal and wet, at length dawned, and discovered to my sleeplessness and aching eyes the church of Ingolstadt, its white steeple and clock, which indicated the 6th hour. The porter opened the gates of the court, which had that night been my asylum, and I issued into the streets, pacing them with quick steps. As if I sought to avoid the wretch whom I feared every turning of the street would present to my view. I did not dare return to the apartment which I inhabited, but felt impelled to hurry on, although drenched by the rain which poured from a black and comfortless sky. I continued walking in this manner for some time, endeavoring by bodily exercise to ease the load that weighed upon my mind. I traversed the streets without any clear conception of where I was or what I was doing. My heart palpitated in the sickness of fear, and I hurried on with irregular steps, not daring to look about me. Like one who, on a lonely road, doth walk in fear and dread, and having once turned around, walks on, and turns no more his head. because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him dread. Continuing thus, cars. Continuing thus, I came at length opposite to the inn at which the various diligences and carriages usually stopped. Here I paused. I knew not. Here I paused. I knew not why, but I remained some minutes with my eyes fixed on a coach that was coming towards me from the other end of the street. I got quite some busyness out here tonight. As it drew nearer, I observed that it was the Swiss diligence. It stopped just where I was standing, and on the door being opened, I perceived Henry Clerval, who, on seeing me, instantly sprung out. "My dear Frankenstein!" "My dear Frankenstein!" exclaimed he. "How glad I am to see you! How fortunate that you should be here at the very moment of my alighting!" "My dear Frankenstein!" exclaimed he. "How glad I am to see you! How fortunate that you should be here at the very moment of my alighting!" Nothing could equal my delight on seeing Clerval. His presence brought back to my thoughts my father, Elizabeth, and all those scenes of home so dear to my recollection. I grasped his hand, and in a moment forgot my horror and misfortune. I felt suddenly, and for the first time during many months, calm and serene joy. I welcomed my friend, therefore, in the most cordial manner, and we walked towards my college. Clerval continued talking for some time about our mutual friends, and his own good fortune in being permitted to come to Ingolstadt. "You may easily believe," said he, "how great the difficulty to persuade my father that all necessary knowledge was not comprised in the noble art of bookkeeping. And indeed I believe I left him incredulous to the last, for his constant answer to my unwearied entreaties was the same as that of the Dutch schoolmaster and the vicar of Wakefield. I have 10,000 florins a year without Greek. I eat heartily without Greek." But his affection for me at length overcame his dislike of learning, and he has permitted me to undertake a voyage of discovery to the land of knowledge. "It gives me the greatest delight to see you. But tell me." "It gives me the greatest delight to see you. But tell me how you left my father, brothers, and Elizabeth." "Very well, very happy. Only a little uneasy that they heard. Only a little uneasy that they hear from you so seldom. By the by, I mean to lecture you a little upon their account myself. But, my dear Frankenstein," continued he, stopping short and gazing full in my face, I did not before remark how very ill you appear. So thin and pale. You look as if you've been watching for several nights." You have guessed right. I have lately been so deeply engaged in one occupation that I have not allowed myself sufficient rest, as you see. But I sincerely hope, that all these employments are now at an end, and that I am at length free. I trembled excessively. I could not endure to think of, and far less allude to, the occurrences of the preceding night. I walked with a quick pace, and soon arrived at my college. I then reflected, and the thought made me shiver that the creature whom I had left in my apartment might still be there, alive, and walking about. I dreaded to behold this monster, but I feared still more that Henry should see him. Entreating him, therefore, to remain a few minutes at the bottom of the stairs, I darted up towards my own room. My hand was already on the lock of the door before I recollected myself. I then paused. A cold shivering came over me. I threw the door forcibly open, as children are accustomed to do when they expect a specter to stand in waiting for them on the other side. But nothing appeared. I stepped fearfully in. The apartment was empty, and my bedroom was also freed from its hideous guest. I could hardly believe that so great a good fortune could have befallen me, but when I became assured that my enemy had indeed fled, I clapped my hands for joy and ran down to Clerval. We ascended into my room, and the servant presently brought breakfast, but I was unable to contain myself. It was not joy only that possessed me. I felt my flesh tingle with excess of sensitiveness, and my pulse beat rapidly. I was unable to remain for a single instant in the same place. I jumped over the chairs, clapped my hands, and laughed aloud. Clerval at first attributed my unusual spirits to joy on his arrival, but when he observed me more attentively, he saw a wildness in my eyes for which he could not account, and my loud, unrestrained, heartless laughter frightened and astonished him. "My dear Victor," cried he, "what, for God's sake, is the matter? Do not laugh in that manner. How ill you are! What is the cause of all of this? Do not laugh in that manner. How ill you are! What is the cause of all this?" "Do not ask me," cried I. "Do not ask me," cried I, putting my hands before my eyes, for I thought I saw the dreaded spectre glide into the room. "He can tell. Oh, save me! Save me!" I imagine that the monster seized me. I struggled furiously and fell down in a fit. Poor Clerval! What must have been his feelings? A meeting which he anticipated with such joy so strangely turned to bitterness. But I was not the witness of his grief, for I was lifeless and did not recover my senses for a long, long time. For a long, long cars. At least it lets me get a refill. For I was lifeless and did not recover my senses. For a long, long time. This was the commencement of a nervous fever, which confined me for several months. During all that time, Henry was my only nurse. I afterwards learned that, knowing my father's advanced age, and unfitness for so long a journey, and how wretched my sickness would make Elizabeth, he spared them his grief by concealing the extent of my disorder. He knew that I could not have a more kind and attentive nurse than himself. And firm in the hope he felt of my recovery. He did not doubt that, instead of doing harm, he performed the kindest action that he could towards them. But I was in, but I was in reality very ill, and surely nothing but the unbounded and unremitting attentions of my friend could have restored me to life. The form of the monster on whom I had bestowed The form of the monster on whom I had bestowed existence was forever before my eyes, and I raved incessantly concerning him. Doubtless my words surprised Henry. He at first believed them to be the wanderings of my disturbed imagination, but the pertinacity with which I continually recurred to the same subject persuaded him that my disorder indeed owed its origin to some uncommon and terrible event. By very slow degrees, and with frequent relapses that alarmed and with frequent re- and with frequent and with frequent relapses that alarmed and grieved my and with frequent relapses that alarmed and grieved my friend, I recovered. I remember the first time that I became capable of observing outward objects with any kind of pleasure. I perceived that the fallen leaves had disappeared, and that the young buds were shooting forth from the trees that shaded my window. It was a divine spring, and the season contributed greatly to my convalescence. I felt also sentiments of joy and affection revive in my bosom. My gloom disappeared, and in a short time I became as cheerful as before I was attacked by the fatal passion. "Dearest Clerval," exclaimed I, "how kind, how very good you are to me. This whole winter, instead of being spent in study, as you promised yourself, has been consumed in my sick room. How shall I ever repay you? I feel the greatest remorse for the disappointment of which I have been the occasion, but you will forgive me. You will repay me entirely if you do not discompose yourself, but get well as fast as you can, and since you appear in such good spirits, I may speak to you on one subject, may I not? And since you appear in such good spirits, I may speak to you on one subject, may I not? I trembled. I trembled. One subject! What could it be? Could he allude to an object on whom I dared not even think? "Compose yourself," said Clerval, who observed my change of color. "I will not mention it if it agitates you, but your father and cousin would be very happy if they received a letter from you in your own handwriting. They hardly know how ill you've been, and are uneasy at your long silence." "Is that all, my dear Henry? How could you suppose that my first thought would not How could you suppose that my first thought would not fly towards those dear, dear friends whom I love, and who were so deserving of my love? If this is your present temper, my friend, you will perhaps be glad to see a letter that has been lying here for some days for you. It is from your cousin, I believe." "It is from your cousin, I believe." Chapter 6. Clerval then put the following letter into my hands. It was from my own Elizabeth. "My dearest cousin, you have been ill, very ill, and even the constant letters of dear kind Henry are not sufficient to reassure me on your account. You are forbidden to write, to hold a pen, yet one word from you, dear Victor, is necessary to calm our apprehensions. For a long time I have thought that For a long time, I thought that each post would bring this line, and my persuasions have restrained my uncle from undertaking a journey to Ingolstadt. I prevented his encountering the inconveniences and perhaps dangers of so long a journey, yet how often have I regretted not being able to perform it myself? I figured to dev- I figured to myself that the task of attending on your sick bed has devolved on some mercenary old nurse who could never guess your wishes, nor minister to them with the care and affection of your poor cousin. Yet that is over now. Clerval writes that indeed you are getting better. I eagerly hope that you will confirm this intelligence soon in your own handwriting. Get well, and return to us. You will find a happy, cheerful home, and friends who love you dearly. Your father's health is vigorous, and he asks but to see you, but to, s- but to be assured that you are well, and not a care will ever cloud his benevolent countenance. How pleased you would be to remark the improvement of our Ernest. He is now 16, and full of activity and spirit. He is desirous to become a true He is desirous to be a true Swiss, and to enter into foreign service, but we cannot part with him, at least until his elder brother returns to us. My uncle is not pleased with the idea of a military career in a distant country, but Ernest never had your powers of application. He looks upon study as an odious fetter. His time is spent in the open air, climbing the hills or rowing on the lake. I fear that he will become an idler unless we yield the point and permit him to enter on the profession which he has selected. Little attention except for the growth of our dear children has taken place since you last left us. Little alteration except for the Little alteration except the growth of our dear children has taken place since you left us. The blue lake and snow-clad mountains, they never change, and I think our placid home and our contented hearts are regulated by the same immutable laws. My trifling occupations take up my time and amuse me, and I am rewarded for any exertions by seeing none but happy, kind faces around me. Since you left us, but one change has taken place in our little household. Do you remember on what occasion Justine Moritz entered our family? Probably you do not. I will relate her history, therefore, in a few words. Madame Moritz, her mother, was a widow with 4 children, of whom Justine was the third. This girl had always been the favorite of her father, but through a strange perversity, her mother could not endure her, and after the death of M. Moritz, could not endure. Hmm. And, after the death of M. Moritz, treated her very ill. My aunt observed this, and when Justine was 12 years of age, prevailed on her mother to allow her to live at our house. The republican institutions of our country have produced a simpler and happier means than those which prevail in the great monarchies that surround it. Hence there is less distinction between the several classes of its inhabitants, and the lower orders being neither so poor nor so despised, their manners are more refined and moral. A servant in Geneva does not mean the same thing as a servant. A servant in Geneva does not mean the same thing as a servant in France and England. Justine, thus received in our family, learned the duties of a servant, a condition which, in our fortunate country, does not include the idea of ignorance and a sacrifice of the dignity of a human being. Justine, you may remember. Justine, you may remember, was a great favorite of yours. Justine, you may remember, was a great favorite of yours, and I recollect you once remarked that if you were in ill humor, one glance from Justine could dissipate it. that if you were in an ill humor, one glance from Justine could dissipate it, for the same reason that Erosto gives concerning the beauty of Angelica. For the same reason that Ariosto gives concerning the beauty of Angelica, she looked so frank-hearted and happy. My aunt conceived a great attachment for her, by which she was induced to give her an education superior to that which she had first intended. She had at first intended. This benefit was fully repaid. Justine was the most grateful little creature in the world. I do not mean that she made any professions. I never heard one pass her lips. But you could see by her eyes that she almost adored her, but you could see by her eyes that she almost adored her protectress. Although her disposition was gay, and in many respects inconsiderate, yet she paid the greatest attention to every gesture of my aunt. She thought her the model of all excellence, and endeavored to imitate her phraseology and manners, so that even now she often reminds me of her. When my dearest aunt died, everyone was too much occupied in their own grief to notice poor Justine, who had attended her during her illness with the most anxious affection. Poor Justine was very ill, but other trials were reserved for her. One by one, her brothers and sisters died, and her mother, with the exception of her neglected daughter, was left childless. The conscience of the woman was troubled. She began to think that the deaths of her favorites was a judgment from heaven to chastise her partiality. She was a Roman Catholic, and I believe her confessor confirmed the idea which she had conceived. Accordingly, a few months after your departure for Ingolstadt, Justine was called home by her repentant mother. Poor girl! She wept when she quitted our house. She was much altered since the death of my aunt. Grief had given softness and a winning mildness to her manners, which had before been remarkable for vivacity. Nor was her residence at her mother's house of a nature to restore her gaiety. The poor woman was very vacillating in her repentance. She sometimes begged Justine to forgive her unkindness, but much oftener accused her of having caused the deaths of her brothers and sisters. Perpetual fretting at length drew Madame Moritz into a decline which at first increased her irritability, but she is now at peace forever. She died on the first approach of cold weather. At the beginning of this last winter. Justine has returned to us, and I assure you I love her tenderly. She is very clever and gentle, and extremely pretty. As I mentioned before, her mien and her expressions continually remind me of my dear aunt. I must say also a few words to you, my dear cousin, of little darling William. I wish you could see him. He is very tall of his age, his sweet, laughing blue eyes, dark eyelashes, and curling hair. When he smiles, two little dimples appear on each cheek, which are rosy with health. He has already had one or two little wives, but Louisa Byron is his favorite. A pretty little girl of 5 years of age. Now, dear Victor, I say you wish to be indulged in a little gossip concerning the good people of Geneva. The pretty Miss Mansfield has already received the congratulatory visits on her approaching marriage with a young Englishman, John Melbourne, Esquire. Her ugly sister, Madame, married M. Doubliart. Her ugly sister, Manon, married M. Duvillard, the rich banker, last autumn. Your favorite schoolfellow, Louis Manoir, has suffered several misfortunes since the departure of Clerval from Geneva, but he has already recovered his spirits and is reported to be on the point of marrying a very lively, pretty French woman, Madame Tavernier. She is a widow. And much older than Manoir, but she is very much admired and a favorite with everybody. I have written myself into better spirits, dear cousin, but my anxiety returns upon me as I conclude. Write, dearest Victor, one line, one word will be a blessing to us. 10,000 thanks to Henry for his kindness, his affection, and his many letters. We are sincerely grateful. Adieu, my cousin. Take care of yourself, and I entreat you to write. Elizabeth Lavenza, Geneva, March 18th, 17. Dear, dear Elizabeth, I exclaimed when I had read her letter. I will write instantly and relieve you. I will write instantly and relieve them from the anxiety they must feel. I wrote, and this exertion greatly fatigued me, but my convalescence had commenced, and proceeded regularly. In another fortnight I was able to leave my chamber. One of my first duties on my recovery was to introduce Clerval to the several professors of the university. In doing this, I underwent a kind of rough usage, ill befitting the wounds that my mind had sustained. Ever since the fatal night, the end of my labors, and the beginning of my misfortunes, I had conceived a violent antipathy even to the name of natural philosophy. When I was otherwise quite restored to health, the sight of a chemical instrument would renew all the agony of my nervous symptoms. Henry saw this, and rem- Henry saw this, and had removed all my apparatus from my view. He had also changed my apartment, for he perceived that I had acquired a dislike for the room which had previously been my laboratory. But these cares of Clerval were made of no avail when I visited the professors. M. Waldman inflicted torture when he praised, with kindness and warmth, the astonishing progress I had made in the sciences. He soon perceived that I disliked the subject, but not guessing the real cause, he attributed my feelings to modesty, and changed the subject from my improvement to the science itself, with a desire, as I evidently saw, of drawing me out. What could I do? He meant to please, and he tormented me. I felt as if he had placed carefully, one by one in my view, those instruments which were to have I felt as if he had placed carefully, one by one in my view, those instruments which were to be afterwards used in putting me to a slow and cruel death. I writhed under his words, yet dared not exhibit the pain I felt. Clerval, whose eyes and feelings were always quick in discerning the sensations of others, declined the subject, alleging, in excuse, his total ignorance, and the conversation took a more general turn. I thanked my friend from my heart, but I did not speak. I saw plainly that he was surprised. But he never attempted to draw my secret from me, and although I loved him with a mixture of affection and reverence that knew no bounds, yet I could never persuade myself to confide to him that event which was so often present to my recollection, but which I feared the detail to another would only impress more deeply. M. Crimp was not equally docile, and in my condition at that time of almost insupportable sensitiveness, his harsh, blunt encomiums gave me even more pain than the benevolent approbation of M. Waldman. Damn the fellow! Damn the fellow! Cried he. Why, M. Clerval, I assure you that he has outstripped us all. Aye, stare if you please, but it is nevertheless true. A youngster who but a few years ago believed in Cornelius Agrippa as firmly as in the gospel, has now set himself at the head of the university, and if he is not soon pulled down, we shall all be out of countenance. Aye, aye, continued he, observing my face expressive of suffering. M. Frankenstein is modest, an excellent quality in a young man. Young men should be diffident of themselves, you know. Why, Mr. Clerval, I assure you that he outstrips us all. Aye, stare if you please, but it is nevertheless true. A youngster who but a few years ago believed in Cornelius Agrippa as firmly as in the gospel has now set himself at the head of our university, and if he is not soon pulled down, we shall all be out of countenance. Aye, aye, continued he, observing my face expressive of suffering. Mr. Frankenstein is modest, an excellent quality in a young man. Young men should be diffident of themselves, you know, Mr. Clerval. I was myself when young, but that wears out in a very short time. M. Crimp had now commenced an eulogy on himself, which happily turned the conversation from a subject that was so annoying to me. Clerval had never sympathized in my tastes for natural science, and his literary pursuits differed wholly from those which had occupied me. He came to the university with the design of making himself complete master of the Oriental languages, as thus he should open a field for the plan of life he had marked out for himself. Resolved to pursue no inglorious career, he turned his eyes toward the east as affording scope for his spirit of enterprise. The Persian, Arabic, and Sanskrit languages engaged his attention, and I was easily induced to enter on the same studies. Idleness had ever been irksome to me, and now that I wished to fly from reflection and hated my former studies, I felt great relief in being the fellow pupil with my friend, and found not only instruction, but consolation in the works of the Orientalists. I did not, like him, attempt a critical knowledge of their dialects, for I did not contemplate making any other use of them than temporary amusement. I read merely to understand their meanings, and they well repaid my labors. Their melancholy is soothing, and their joy elevating, to a degree I never experienced in studying the authors of any other country. When you read their writings, life appears to consist in a warm sun and a garden of roses, and the smiles and frowns of a fair enemy, and the fire that consumes your own heart. How different from the manly and heroical poetry of Greece and Rome! Summer passed away in these occupations, and my return to Geneva was fixed for the latter end of autumn. But being delayed by several accidents, winter and snow arrived. The roads were deemed impassable, and my journey was retarded until the ensuing spring. I felt this delay very bitterly, for I longed to see my native town and my beloved friends. My return had only been delayed so long from an unwillingness to leave Clerval in a strange place, before he had become acquainted with any of its inhabitants. The winter, however, was spent cheerfully, and although the spring was uncommonly late, when it came, its beauty compensated. When it came, its beauty compensated for its dilatoriness. The month of May had already commenced, and I expected the letter daily, which was to fix the date of my departure, when Henry proposed a pedestrian tour in the environs of Ingolstadt, that I might bid that I might that I might bid a personal farewell to the country I had so long inhabited. I acceded with pleasure to his proposition. I was fond of exercise, and Clerval always had been my favorite companion in the rambles of this nature that I had taken among the scenes of my native country. We passed a fortnight in these perambulations. My health and spirits had long been restored, and they gained additional strength from the salubrious air I breathed, the natural incidents of our progress, and the conversation of my friend. The natural incidents of our progress, and the conversations of my friend. Study had before secluded me from the intercourse of my fellow creatures, and rendered me unsocial. But Clerval called forth the better feelings of my heart. He again taught me to love the aspect of nature, and the cheerful faces of children. Excellent friend! How sincerely did you love me, and endeavor to elevate my mind until it was on a level with your own. The selfish pursuit had cramped and narrowed me, until your gentleness and affection warmed and opened my senses. I became the same happy creature who, a few years ago, loved and beloved by all, had no sorrow or care. When happy, inanimate nature had the power of bestowing on me the most delightful sensations. A serene sky and verdant fields filled me with ecstasy. The present season was indeed divine. The flowers of spring bloomed in the hedges, while those of summer were already in bud. I was undisturbed by thoughts which during the preceding year had pressed upon me. Notwithstanding my endeavors to throw them off with an invincible burden. Henry rejoiced in my gaiety, and sincerely sympathized in my feelings. He exerted himself to amuse me, while he expressed the sensations that filled his soul. The resources of his mind on this occasion were truly astonishing. His conversation was full of imagination, and very often, in imitation of the Persian and Arabic writers, he invented tales of wonderful fancy and passion. At other times he repeated my favorite poems, or drew me out into arguments which he supported with great ingenuity. We returned to our college on a Sunday afternoon. The peasants were dancing, and every one we met appeared gay and happy. My own spirits were high, and I bounded along with feelings of unbridled joy and hilarity. Now, I recognize that I did manage to skip the recap and response of chapter 4, or I should say 5. let's see. Yep. Okay. Let's take a quick run through there again. That's what I thought. Chapter 5 is the attainment. Chapter 5 is not only the attainment in full, but the consequent, but the consequence, but the consequence of Frankenstein's attainment is reanimation, not only in theory, but in actuality, bringing back the monster which he would never bestow or dub a name to, ruined him. As so many throughout all human history, reaching the peak of one's mountain grants the opportunity to peer granted the opportunity to peer back not only over the trail of one's attainment, but towards the future of what might be ahead from it. The incline at the climax, from the climax, the incline and decline of what would follow thereafter. And it ruined. And it racked his mind. And by consequence, his body. If not for the ministrations of Clerval, his childhood friend, with his greatest of commitment and demeanor of kinship to him, he may well have perished. At the mere recognition of what exactly he had achieved. But thankfully for him, or perhaps not by his own account now, he had survived. Shattered, perhaps. Shattered recently, perhaps, but pieced back together. And what awaited? And what awaited such a time? And what awaited such a condition? But a letter from his cousin. And what awaited such a condition? But a letter from his cousin. And closest, a female companion. Chapter 5 is one of the payoffs. Chapter 5 is one of the explicated payoffs of Mary Shelley's primary philosophic thrust. That even should one attain powers beyond that of which man should, his natural rights in science and natural philosophy, that immediately thereafter, even if it should not have wrought any hardship upon the rest of the world yet, the mere act of having done so will bring the destruction of one's confidence in such arts. It will immediately return them to, if not a Philistine, if not a Luddite. It will immediately return them, if not to a Luddite, then to one who has finally recognized what their greatest of sacrifices means, not just for themselves, at least at this chapter, just for, at least in this chapter, just for themselves. And yet even still, it, and yet even limited as it is, it rips, tears a chunk of the soul out. I've already elaborated on this earlier, but the consequences of accepting this philosophic position of delimitation on moral grounds is, in fact, the quickest way to primitivism. And if not, is the quickest path to, if at it, is the quickest path, if not at its worst, of primitivism, to at least, a thoroughgoing traditionalism, more than likely in the conservatistic branch. And I don't mean that strictly in the social sense, but also, but primarily in the technologic one. It is, in and of itself, a doctrine of stagnation, in the best of cases. And hence, especially from my technocratic leanings, especially from my pro-technologic leanings, as we see that invention is the redeemer of all faults which we have produced for ourselves and nature will produce for us. That not only has such a doctrine failed, but is continually being combated, thankfully, even to the moment. Chapter 6 recounts the recovery of Victor Frankenstein. Chapter 6 recounts the recovery of Frankenstein and his revulsion for what he has done. His revulsion for the very arts that enabled him to accommodate what he did. And where did he find that but in the company of his closest of friends? But in the company of his closest of childhood friends. Clerval, the poet, naturalist, not in the scientific sense, and outdoorsmanship, engaging with the natural glories of our world as they stand unaltered and free from the artifice of man, and free from the artifice of the scientist. This, and in the this, and just before, upon hearing the glories of his dearest cousin, Elizabeth. The ongoings. Another car. Again, not the worst thing to happen. Gives me time for a refill anyhow. Might as well readjust while I'm here. And to head this regaining, and to head this reconvalescence, a letter from his dearest love, Elizabeth, to remind him of home away from home, and that before his engagement in a passion unbridled, that he does have a history, and in that history, family, the closest, the closest of filial love. And besides, kithship in Geneva. And the response, Chapter 6 does make a very good point. It offers the position that indeed the natural is wonderful. Perhaps as wonderful, at least, as the many things that we as human beings might produce. And to that, I agree. But not for the reason that Mary Shelley would seem to propose here. Hmm. Not not in the delimiting, not in the scientifically delimiting intellectual conservatism that laces the subtext of the plot, but rather for the booming, all-encompassing pro-intellectual, unqualified pro-intellectualism that enables us to recognize metaphysically and ontologically embrace nature, not simply as an appearance, not simply as an ineffable vitality that is beyond our grasp to fully comprehend, but as one that is systems on systems on systems on systems, millions and millions and millions folded over, that we have the luxury to be conscious of in our little blip on that timeline of reality. And that at the very least, because of that, and that at the very least, because of this fact, that to fully and completely appreciate such a thing, let alone to be a good steward of it, if we wish to maintain that which we were born to safeguard it from the other systems around our little green, to safeguard it, to protect it from the other systems, to protect it from the other systems around our little blue marble. And especially from those that we, and especially those that are anthropogenic, made by us. Those who are actively against such stewardship. Then we must not simply experience, perceive, but conceive and understand. Not to the sole not to the sole purpose of our leverage as benefit, but to protect that that which hasn't the luxury of our awareness. And now onward. Chapter 7. On my return. Well, let's pick up the. Yes. On my return, I found the following letter from my father. My dear Victor, you have probably waited impatiently for a letter to fix the date of your return to us, and while I was at first tempted to write only a few lines, merely mentioning the day on which I should expect you, and I was at first tempted to write only a few lines, merely mentioning the day on which I should expect you, but that would be a cruel kindness, and I dare not do it. What would be your surprise, my son, when you expected a happy and glad welcome? To behold, on the contrary, tears and wretchedness. And how, Victor, can I relate our misfortune? Absence cannot have hindered your Absence cannot have rendered you callous to our joys and griefs, and how shall I inflict pain on my long-absent son? I wish to prepare you for the woeful news, but I know it is impossible. Even now, your eye skims over the page to seek the words which are to convey to you the horrible tidings. William is dead. That sweet child whose smiles delighted and warmed my heart, who was so gentle yet so gay. Victor, he is murdered. I will not attempt to console you, but will simply relate the circumstances of the transaction. Last Thursday, May 7th, I, my niece, and your two brothers went to walk in Plain Palais. I'll look that up quickly. Just in time for a car. I'm getting lucky today. Okay, I guess it's not a standard name. Or at least it isn't in the dictionary I'm looking at. Close. Last Thursday, May 7th, I, my niece, and your two brothers went to walk in Plain Palais. The evening was warm and serene, and we prolonged our walk farther than usual. It was already dusk before we thought of returning, and then we discovered that William and Ernest, who had gone on before, were not to be found. We accordingly rested on a seat until they should return. Presently, Ernest came and inquired if we had seen his brother. He said that he had been playing with him, that William had run away to hide himself, and that he vainly sought for him, and afterwards waited for him a long time, but that he did not return. This account rather alarmed us, and we continued to search for him until night fell, when Elizabeth conjectured that he might have returned to the house. He was not there. We returned again with torches, for I could not rest when I thought that my sweet boy had lost himself, and was exposed to all the damps and dews of night. Elizabeth also suffered extreme anguish. About 5 in the morning, I discovered my lovely boy. About 5 in the morning, I discovered my lovely boy, whom the night before I had seen blooming and active in health, stretched on the grass, livid and motionless. The print of the murderer's finger was on his neck. He was conveyed home, and the anguish that was visible in my countenance betrayed the secret to Elizabeth. She was very earnest to see the corpse. At first I attempted to prevent her, but she persisted, and entering into the room where it lay, hastily examined the neck of the victim, and clasping her hands, exclaimed, "Oh, God! I have murdered my darling child!" She fainted, and was restored with extreme difficulty. When she again lived, it was only to weep and sigh. She told me that same evening William had teased her to let him wear a very valuable miniature that she possessed of your mother. This picture is gone, and was doubtless the temptation which urged the murderer to the deed. We have no trace of him at present, although our exertions to discover him are unremitted, but they will not restore my beloved William. Come, dearest Victor, you alone can console Elizabeth. She weeps continually, and accuses herself unjustly as the cause of his death. Her words pierce my heart. We are all unhappy, but will that not be an additional motive for you, my son, to return and be our comforter? Your dear mother! Alas, Victor, I now say, thank God she did not live to witness the cruel, miserable death of her youngest darling. Come, Victor, not brooding thoughts of vengeance against the assassin, but with feelings of peace and gentleness that will heal instead of festering the wounds of our minds. Enter the house of mourning, my friend. Enter the house of mourning, my friend, but with kindness and affection for those who love you, and not with hatred for your enemies. Your affectionate and afflicted father, Alphonse Frankenstein. Geneva, May 12th, 17. Clerval, who watched my countenance as I read this letter, was surprised to observe the despair that succeeded to the joy I had first expressed on receiving news from my friends. I threw the letter on the table and covered my face with my hands. "My dear Frankenstein!" exclaimed Henry, when he perceived me weep with bitterness. "Are you always to be unhappy? My dear friend, what has happened?" I motioned to him to take up the letter, while I walked up and down the room in the extremest agitation. Tears also gushed from the eyes of Clerval, as he read the account of my misfortune. "I can offer you no consolation, my friend," said he. "Your disaster is irreparable. Your disaster is irreparable. What do you intend to do?" "To go instantly to Geneva." "To go instantly to Geneva. Come with me, Henry, to order the horses." "To go instantly to Geneva. Come with me, Henry, to order the horses." During our walk, Clerval endeavored to say a few words of consolation. He could only express his heartfelt sympathy. He could only express his heartfelt sympathy. "Poor William, poor William," said he. "Dear, lovely child, he now sleeps with his angel mother. Who that who that had seen him bright and joyous in his young beauty must weep. Who that seen him bright and joyous in his young beauty but must weep over his untimely loss. To die so miserably, to feel the murderer's grasp. How much more a murderer that could destroy such a radiant innocence. Poor little fellow. Poor little fellow. One only consolation have we, his friends mourn and weep, but he is at rest. The pang is over, his sufferings are at an end forever. The sod covers his gentle form, and he knows no pain. He can no longer be a subject for pity. He must reserve that for his miserable survivors." Clerval spoke thus as we hurried through the streets. The words impressed themselves on my mind, and I remembered them afterwards in solitude. But now, as soon as the horses arrived, I hurried into a cabriolet and bade farewell to my friend. My journey was very melancholy. At first I wished to hurry on, for I longed to console and sympathize with my loved, and sorrowing friends. But when I drew near my native town, I slackened my progress. I could hardly sustain the multitude of feelings that crowded into my mind. I passed through scenes familiar to my youth, but which I had not seen for nearly 6 years. How altered everything might be during that time! One sudden and desolating change had taken place, but 1,000 little circumstances might have by degrees worked other alterations, which, although they were done more tranquilly, might not be the less decisive. Fear overcame me. I dared not advance, dreading 1,000 nameless evils that made me tremble, although I was unable to define them. I remained 2 days. Well, let's get that properly pronounced. And that's what I thought. I remained 2 days at Lausanne, in this painful state of mind. I contemplated the lake. The waters were. I contemplated the lake. The waters were placid. All around was calm, and the snowy mountains, the palaces of nature, were not changed. By degrees, the calm and heavenly scene restored me, and I continued my journey towards Geneva. The road ran by the side of the lake, which became narrower as I approached my native town. I discovered more distinctly the black sides of Jura. I believe that is the right pronunciation. Jura. Glad I checked. I discovered more distinctly the black sides of Zura and the bright summit of Mont Blanc. I wept like a child. Dear mountain, dear mountains, my own beautiful lake, how do you welcome your wanderer? How do you welcome your wanderer? Your summits are clear. The sky and lake are blue and placid. Is this to prognosticate peace, or to mock at my unhappiness? I fear, my friend, that I shall render myself tedious by dwelling on these preliminary circumstances. But they were days of comparative happiness, and I think of them with pleasure. My country, my beloved country, who but a native can tell the delight I took in again beholding thy streams, thy mountains, and more than all, thy lovely lake. Yet, as I drew nearer home, grief and fear again overcame me. Night also closed around, and when I could hardly see the dark mountains, I felt still more gloomily. The picture appeared a vast and dim scene of evil, and I foresaw obscurely that I was destined to become the most wretched of human beings. Alas! I prophesied truly, and failed only in one single circumstance, that on all the misery I imagined and dreaded, I did not conceive the 100th part of the anguish I was destined to endure. It was completely dark when I arrived in the environs of Geneva. The gates of the town were already shut, and I was obliged to pass the night at Secheron. And I was obliged to pass the night in Secheron, a village at the distance of half a league from the city. The sky was serene, and as I was unable to rest, I resolved to visit the spot where my poor William had been murdered. As I could not pass through the town, I was obliged to cross the lake in a boat to arrive at Planapa. Double check that. Plan Palais. Jeez. Where were we? Planapa. Goodness. I was obliged to cross the lake in a boat to arrive. I was obliged to cross the lake in a boat to arrive at Plan Palais. During this short voyage, I saw the lightnings play on the summit of Mont Blanc in the most beautiful figures. The storm appeared to approach rapidly, and on landing, I ascended a low hill that I might observe its progress. It advanced, the heavens were clouded, and I soon felt the rain coming slowly in large drops, but its violence quickly increased. I quitted my seat and walked on, although the darkness and storm increased every minute, and the thunder burst with a terrific crash over my head. It was echoed from Salève. Salève. Yeah, I'm not nailing the French today. It was echoed from Salève, the Zuras, and the Alps of Savoy. Vivid flashes of lightning dazzled my... Let's do that again. It was echoed from Salève, the Zuras, and the Alps of Savoy. Vivid flashes of lightning dazzled my eyes, illuminating the lake, making it appear like a vast sheet of fire. Then, for an instant, everything seemed a pitchy darkness. Everything seemed of a pitchy darkness, until the eye recovered itself from the preceding flash. Until the eye recovered itself from the preceding flash. The storm, as is often the case in Switzerland, appeared at once in various parts of the heavens. The most violent storm hung exactly north of the town, over that part of the lake which lies between the promontory of Belle-Rive and the village of Coppet. Now, I believe I got that one right. Let's see. Hey! Another storm enlightened Zura with faint flashes, and another darkened and sometimes disclosed the Mole, a peaked mountain to the east of the lake. Man, I love it when they get specific with it. Mole. Yeah. Okay. Glad I keep checking. And another darkened and sometimes disclosed the Mole, a peaked mountain to the east of the lake. While I watched the tempest, so beautiful yet terrific, I wandered on with a hasty step. This noble war in the sky elevated my spirits. I clasped my hands and exclaimed aloud, "William, dear angel, this is thy funeral, this thy dirge." That was murder on the voice. Let's have a quick sip. All right. William, dear angel, this is thy funeral, this thy dirge. As I said these words, I perceived in the gloom a figure which stole from behind a clump of trees near me. I stood fixed, gazing intently. I could not be mistaken. A flash of lightning illuminated the object and discovered its shape plainly to me. Its gigantic stature and the deformity of its aspect, more hideous than belonging to humanity, instantly informed me that it was the wretch, the filthy Diamond, to whom I had given life. What did he there? Could he be, I shuddered at the conception, the murderer of my brother? No sooner did that idea cross my imagination than I became convinced of its truth. My teeth chattered, and I was forced to lean against a tree for support. The figure passed me quickly, and I lost it in the gloom. Nothing in human shape could have destroyed that fair child. He was the murderer. I could not doubt it. He was the murderer. I could not doubt it. The mere presence of the idea was an irresistible proof of the fact. I thought of pursuing the devil, but it would have been in vain, for another flash discovered him to me hanging among the rocks of the nearby perpendicular ascent of Mont Saleve, a hill that bounds Plainpalais of the south. A hill that bounds Plainpalais on the south. He soon reached the summit and disappeared. I remained motionless. The thunder ceased, but the rain still continued, and the scene was enveloped in an impenetrable darkness. I revolved in my mind the events which I had until now sought to forget, the whole train of my progress towards the creation, the appearance of the work of my own hands alive at my bedside, its departure. 2 years had now nearly elapsed since the night on which he first... 2 years had now nearly elapsed since the night on which the first received... 2 years had now nearly elapsed since the night on which he first received life. And was this his first crime? Alas! I had turned loose into the world a depraved wretch, whose delight was in carnage and misery. Had he not murdered my brother? No one can conceive the anguish I suffered during the remainder of the night, which I spent, cold and wet, in the open air. But I did not feel the inconvenience of the weather. My imagination was busy in scenes of evil and despair, and considered the being whom I had cast among mankind, and endowed with the will and power to effect purposes of horror, such as the deeds which he had now done, nearly in the light of my own vampire, my own spirit let loose from the grave, and forced to destroy all that was dear to me. Day dawned, and I directed my steps towards the town. The gates were opened, and I hastened to my father's house. My first thought was to discover what I knew of the murderer, and cause instant pursuit to be made. But I paused when I reflected on the story that I had to tell. The being whom I myself had formed and endued with life had met me at midnight among the precipices of an inaccessible mountain. I remembered also the nervous fever with which I had been seized just at the time that I dated my creation, and which would give an air of delirium to a tale otherwise so utterly improbable. I well knew that if any other had communicated such a relation to me, I should have looked upon it as the ravings of insanity. Besides, the strange creature of the animal would elude all pursuit, even if I were so far credited as to persuade my relatives to commence it. And then of what use would be pursuit? Who could arrest a creature capable of scaling the overhanging sides of Mount Salève? These reflections determined me, and I resolved to remain silent. It was about 5 in the morning when I entered my father's house. I told the servants not to disturb the family, and went into the library to attend their usual hour of rising. 6 years had elapsed, passed as a dream, but for one indelible trace, and I stood in the same place where I had last embraced my father before my departure for Ingolstadt. Beloved and venerable parent, he still remained to me. I gazed on the picture of my mother, which stood over the mantelpiece. It was an historical subject, painted at my father's desire, and represented Caroline Beaufort in an agony of despair, kneeling by the coffin of her dead father. Her garb was rustic, and her cheek pale, but there was an air of dignity and beauty that hardly permitted the sentiment of pity. Below this picture was a miniature of William, and my tears flowed when I looked upon it. While I was thus engaged, Ernest entered. He had heard me arrive, and hastened to welcome me. He expressed his sorrowful delight to see me. "Welcome, my dearest Victor," said he. "Ah, I wish you had come 3 months ago, and then you would have—" Well, another car. Given the timing and the frequency of the vehicles, I think that we will probably cut it just below 2 hours of reading. I think this is going to end up being a 6-parter. So, interesting. But we're making good time anyway. Ah, I wish you had come 3 months ago, and then you would have found us all joyous and delighted. You come to us now to share a misery which nothing can alleviate. Yet your presence will, I hope, revive our father, who seems sinking under his misfortune, and your persuasions will induce poor Elizabeth to cease her vain and tormenting self-accusations. And your persuasions will induce poor Elizabeth to cease her vain and tormenting self-accusations. Poor William! He was our darling and our pride. Poor William! He was our darling and our pride. He was our darling and our pride. Tears, unrestrained, fell from my brother's eyes. A sense of mortal agony crept over my frame. Before, I had only imagined the... Before, I had only imagined... I had only imagined the wretchedness of my desolated home. The reality came on me as a new and not less terrible disaster. I tried to calm Ernest. I inquired more minutely concerning my father, and her I named my cousin. She, most of all, said Ernest, requires consolation. She accused herself of having caused the death of my brother, and that made her very wretched. But since the murderer has been discovered... The murderer discovered? Good God, how can that be? Who could attempt to pursue him? It is possible one might as well try to overtake the winds, or confine a mountain stream with a straw. I saw him too. He was free last night. I do not know what you mean, replied my brother, in accents of wonder. I do not know what you mean, replied my brother, in accents of wonder. But to us the discovery we have made completes our misery. No one would believe it at first, and even now Elizabeth will not be convinced, notwithstanding all the evidence. Indeed, who would credit that Justine Moritz, who was so amiable and fond of all the family, could suddenly become capable of so frightful, so appalling a misery, had he not murdered my brother? No one can conceive the anguish I suffered during the remainder of the night. No one can conceive the anguish I suffered during the remainder of the night, which I spent cold and wet in the open air. But I did not feel the inconvenience of the weather. Oh? I thought that flowed a little unusual. Hmm. Indeed, who would... Indeed, who would credit that Justine Moritz, who was so amiable and fond of all the family, could suddenly become capable of so frightful, so appalling a crime? Justine Moritz, poor girl. Is she the accused? Justine Moritz, poor girl. Poor girl. Is she the accused? But it is wrongfully, everyone knows that. No one believes it, surely, Ernest. No one did at first, but several circumstances came out that have almost forced conviction upon us. and her own behavior has been so confused as to add to the evidence of facts a weight that I fear leaves no room. A weight that I fear leaves no hope or doubt. But she will be tried today, and you will then hear all. He related that, the morning on which the murder of poor William had been discovered, Justine had been taken ill and confined to her bed for several days. During this interval, one of the servants, happening to examine the apparel she had worn on the night of the murder, had discovered in her pocket the picture of my mother, which had been judged to be the temptation of the murderer. The servant instantly showed it to one of the others, who, without saying a word to any of the family, went to a magistrate, and upon their deposition, Justine was apprehended. Being charged with the fact, the poor girl confirmed the suspicion in a great measure by her extreme confusion of manner. This was a strange tale, but it did not shake my faith, and I replied earnestly, "You are all mistaken. I know the murderer. Justine, poor, good Justine, is innocent." At that instant my father entered. I saw unhappiness deeply impressed on his countenance, but he endeavored to welcome me cheerfully, and after we had exchanged our mournful greeting, Oh, that's what happened. I see. Apparently the forward and backward button swaps chapters. Or at least advances. Let's see. Yeah, I guess goes to the nearest chapter or the place you were just at. The more you know. The more you know. I saw unhappiness deeply impressed on his countenance, but he endeavored to welcome me cheerfully, and after we had exchanged our mournful greeting, would have introduced some other topic than that of our disaster, had not Ernest exclaimed, "Good God, Papa! Victor says Good God, Papa! Victor says that he knows who was the murderer of poor William." We do also, unfortunately, replied. "We do also, unfortunately," replied my father, "for indeed I had rather have been forever ignorant than have discovered so much depravity and ingratitude in one I valued so highly." "We do also, unfortunately," replied my father, "for indeed I had rather have been forever ignorant than have discovered so much depravity and ingratitude in one I valued so highly." "My dear father, you are mistaken. Justine is innocent." "If she is, God forbid that she should suffer as guilty. She is to be tried today, and I hope, sincerely hope, that she will be acquitted." "If she is, God forbid that she should suffer as guilty. She is to be tried today, and I sincerely hope, that she will be acquitted." This speech calmed me. I was firmly convinced in my own mind that Justine, and indeed every human being, was guiltless of this murder. I had no fear, therefore, that any circumstantial evidence could be brought forward strong enough to convict her. My tale was not one to announce publicly. Its astounding horror would be looked upon as madness by the vulgar. Did any one indeed exist, except I, the Creator, who would believe, unless his senses convinced him, in the existence of the living monument of presumption and rash ignorance which I had let loose upon the world. We were soon joined by Elizabeth. Time had altered her since I last beheld her. It had endowed her with loveliness surpassing the beauty of her childish years. It was the same candor, the same vivacity, but it was allied to an expression more full of sensibility and intellect. She welcomed me. She welcomed me with the greatest affection. Your arrival, my dear cousin, said she, fills me with hope. Perhaps will find some means to justify my poor guiltless Justine. Alas, who is safe if she be convicted of crime? I rely on her innocence as certainly as I do upon my own. Our misfortune is doubly hard to us. We have not only lost the lovely, darling boy, but this poor girl whom I sincerely love is to be torn away by even a worse fate. If she is condemned, I never shall know joy more. I never shall know joy more. But she will not. I am sure she will not. And then I shall be happy again, even after the sad death of my little William. She is innocent, my Elizabeth, said I, and that shall be proved. Fear nothing, but let your spirits be cheered by the assurance of her acquittal. But let your spirits be cheered by the assurance of her acquittal. How kind and generous you are. Everyone else believes in her guilt, and that made me wretched. Everyone else believes in her guilt, and that made me wretched. And another car. Everyone else believes in her guilt, and that made me wretched, for I knew that it was impossible. And to see everyone else prejudiced in so deadly a manner rendered me hopeless and despairing. And to see everyone else prejudiced in so deadly a manner, rendered me hopeless and despairing. She wept. Dearest niece, dearest niece, said my father, dry your tears. If she is, as you believe, innocent, rely on the justice of our laws, and the activity with which I shall prevent the slightest shadow of partiality. And the activity with which I shall prevent the slightest shadow of partiality. All right. Just in time. Let's take a quick sip after Alphonse's voice. Hmm. Let's see the beginning of this again. That's what I thought. In Chapter 6, disaster strikes again. Not by the circumstances of life's natural course. As Victor Frankenstein himself has trodden upon, but instead by the direct consequences, by the direct consequences of his own experiment, but by the direct consequences of his own monstrosity. He receives a letter from his dearest family, from his dearest father, which explains that his youngest brother is dead. And not just dead, murdered. And that murder, he knows, in his deepest of hearts, is by the consequence of his own creation. His dearest, poor William, who was young, in the bloom of life, has been taken from them, choked by the neck, and in place of the monster Frankenstein knows to be the true culprit, which he witnesses on his way to his hometown of Geneva, while on the outskirts, in the midst of a storm, in the deep, inaccessible valleys of his mountain home, of his mountainous home. Justine Moritz, one of the most delightful individuals folks brought into the family, a servant to the family, a servant brought up true and pure, with even investment from the family into her education, who bestowed the most thorough of love upon them, is taken instead as the accused. For within her clothes they found a picture which was in a locket given to little William of the mother of Madame Frankenstein, the deceased mother of the family. Something that all besides Victor himself would perceive as the most damning bit of evidence as to her being the one. As to her being the killer. After the reprieve in nature that Victor found himself in, after the reprieve of nature and friendship that Victor himself found in Clairvaux and Ingolstadt, his return home leaves him. His return home shows him that down the mountain path, from the apex he had achieved, now those consequences are paid in full. Now those consequences are just beginning to be paid in full. The symbolism here being that his scientific accomplishment, the symbolism being here that his accomplishments in science have not only haunted him, crippled his soul. but now have snatched the life of his youngest brother. Youth. The potential of youth drawn to an end. Drawn to an end undue. The opportunity of so many shall be sacrificed on the altar, shall be sacrificed on the altar of progress. And yet, the underlying fault, and yet the fault in such a substrate of position is that in order to have even attained such delights as could be lost in the first place, there was not sacrifice laid on the altar of progress, as no such exists, but rather the labors of men and women who fought to provide for humanity. As Mr. Waldman himself said, as the chemist Mr. Waldman himself says in the earlier chapters, that the genius of men ever turns to the advantage of humanity. Not in isolation, as we see here, but instead upon its exposure to the light of the intellect of the common. That what holds the tension of unbridled, that what holds the tension of unrefined, rude, and destructive discovery is the recognition and structure provided by all men who have the bother, care, will, and capacity to understand. And by this tension, we attain a balance that earns the title of being called progress. All right. And now, I think we're going to take a quick recess and then get into Amnesia, the Dark Descent. See you soon. Oh, close to being centered, but not quite. There we go. Should be about it. Yeah, okay. So, onward to Amnesia. Now, I have only fired this up so that I can see as to whether it would work, given that it is from 2010. At least that's what it was released on Steam as, the date of. You know, it's probably actually worth knowing. Let me take a quick peek over. Amnesia, Amnesia, Amnesia. And yeah, 2010. Okay, cool. Yep. Almost old enough to get a driver's license in the States. Ah, yes. Now, I did take the bother of looking up a brief overview of it to see if it would fit the kind of mesh that we were building here with Frankenstein. And I forgot. There is hard mode. Apparently quite a significant modification of the game. Really ups its difficulty. Oh. Stopped respawn. Old games.
Some things mustn't be forgotten. The shadow hunting me. I must hurry. My name is Daniel. I live in London at Mayfair. What have I done? This is crazy. Don't forget. Don't forget. I must stop him. Focus. My name is I am Daniel.
Yeah, that's definitely 2010. That intro sequence reminded me just a touch of Hitman. Wow, that is blurry. Ocean blur supreme. But it reminds me of Hitman Contracts just a bit, in that there's the opening sequence of disorientation that we observe. Oh, it's not E? Ah, yes. Clicks. Oh, that was revolutionary back in the day. Opening doors with drag. Of such things. But it's good to know that we're Daniel of Mayfair in London. Alright, interesting. And I cannot take that with me. Okay. Well, good to know. We're apparently a little tilty. Save. I didn't notice any kind of keybinds that we could observe. Huh. No, okay. Yeah. Tis what tis. But we do have lean. and some mysterious violet fluid. Is that a good thing or bad thing? I'm gonna assume that's just a neutral thing. Variety. You just have a shirt and a tinderbox and a ginormous boudoir? Coat cupboard? Alright. I assume I can't read that document. Guess not. What do we have here? The lighting Renaissance style painting. For those who haven't watched my previous content, you'll probably have noticed by now I'm a fiend for trying to pick up just about everything I can in a given area. I'm leaning to the right now. Well, at least we're getting both sides. Oh. Ah, yes. I do recall one of the big things of the whole game is that it's a fully 3D physics-rendered experience. I believe I even recall that being on the page. I believe I recall that even being on the Steam page. Alongside those like Half-Life 2, this was quite revolutionary at the time. Most 3D games being limited to just... Oh, I guess the whole place is creaking. Most 3D games being limited to only just the predefined physics of the thing. Back to crawling. You know, not close to the ground is a good place to be when everything's shaking, I find. What do we got here? Whole lot of nothing. Okay. What's that, plasterboard? What am I stepping on? Alright. I guess we've just got bug sounds. Slight fragments of crushed glass. Howdy. What have we here? Another shirt. This guy really likes just having single shirts in ginormous cupboards. Cabinets? Cabinet. There's no cups in that board. Anything behind the stairs? Dirt. Oh. Oh, yeah. Right. So that would be why we're hearing little crunching noises. That's his soul shriveling up. That's what we call desiccation of the psyche, my friends. Oh, there's almost no draw distance to the darkness. That's devilish. Well, back on the violet path. So much sunlight out. It's very Cain and Abel-ish. Probably gives us a good indication of where the story is going, at least. Well, I guess I lost my rock. What a shame. And of course, we've got to have our classic wall torches. Oh, there are bugs. Okay. Can we sprint? I guess not. We can at least get another book. Yo, this is Vertigo proper. Just gonna pan my camera around, make me see. Look here, it says. Very well, I suppose. Hey! No, that's what we're looking for. Oh, we do have a proper inventory. It's not much oil. Better than the hands pounding and the heart shaking, I suppose. Ah, yes. Ah, it's a pool. The trickiest of doors. Yeah, whatever you say. I'm gonna go back, because I'm pretty sure we missed a bit of length we could explore. Ah, no, it's just a cave-in and a castle? There's not even anything in the ceiling that indicates it fell! Alright. Well, it is a game circa 2010. We can't be, I suppose, that harsh upon it. You know, maybe one of these devils of the area properly came about and just decided, enough is enough, we've got to pile up all of these rocks. Ah, yes. The box. The most humble of all ventures. At least this has something besides just a single shirt in it. I'll accept that. Man, whoever had this violet fluid, they really, really had quite some of it. Howdy do? Ah, very good.
19th of August, 1839. I wish I could ask how much you remember. I don't know if there'll be anything left after I consume this drink. Don't be afraid, Daniel. I can't tell you why, but know this. I choose to forget. Try to find comfort and strength in that fact. There is a purpose. You are my final effort to put things right. God willing, the name Alexander of Brandenburg still invokes bitter anger in you. If not, this will sound horrible. Go to the inner sanctum, find Alexander, and kill him. His body is old and weak, and yours, young and strong. He will be no match for you. One last thing. A shadow is following you. It's a living nightmare, breaking down reality. I have tried everything, and there is no way to fight back. You need to escape it as long as you can. Redeem us both, Daniel. Descend into the darkness where Alexander waits and murder him. Your former self, Daniel.
Note to self, enjoy the dark descent and kill the fuck out of that guy. Okay, well, I guess that's as good a reason as any, eh? Interesting, interesting. A literal note to future me. And a living nightmare. I wonder if that's literal, or if this is more hyperbolic. Considering the kind of business... Hello? Oh. Ah, I see. Considering the circumstances, I could see if that is truly the case. But now I didn't see any other way through. Perhaps it was that front door that we passed earlier? It got very angry when... Oh, okay. I guess that isn't the right way. Huh. Yeah, I guess the angry door outside is not our passage. To make comment on the structure of the thing, thus far I have been pretty pleased. All of the controls have felt very smooth. Ah, that's what I missed. Although the controls and the environments themselves are very rudimentary, it's all been quite well at building a strong atmosphere and maintaining aesthetic cohesion. Even in the absence of having just read a little bit.
Alexander, is it inside the castle?
Oh.
In a manner of speaking. Come, bring the lamp. You've been to the refinery, have you not?
I don't believe I have. Is it connected to the... what did you call it?
The inner sanctum. My most precious chamber, Daniel. And it lies well beyond the refinery. In fact, it lies beneath the very stone of Brennenburg.
Well, now. Even without the inclusion of some 1800s literature, as I was just reading in Frankenstein, this is positively invoking all of the features of antiquity that I would expect. Obviously, drastically more lavish than might have been properly afforded. In fact, but nonetheless, austerely antiquarian. Goopy. Another game with goop in it. but nonetheless capacious, and with an air of militant nobility. Heavily suffused with the incense-like spice of genuine terror around the corner. Ooh, I've got branching paths I can take. How fancy that. Well, now one is... That's just gonna be a fake out, isn't it? Huh? Huh? Yeah, I don't expect anybody's actually in here. Besides myself, naturally. You don't say. The most crooked Home Depot boards imaginable. Another cave-in with a perfectly preserved roof. Fine. Wow, this really is something of a hub, isn't it? I imagine we'll have something like a crowbar or some such to get those boards out the doors. Well, let's go the exact opposite direction and see what we might find. Those are the thickest cobwebs spider's webs I've ever seen. Are you telling me that this little door handle is enough to raise us up like a foot? Alright, sure. Leave me rotting. Okay.
16th of May, 1839. The unflinching African sun has continued to plague our expedition, making it impossible to dig until dusk. How Professor Herbert managed to find the location in these vast plains of nothingness remains a mystery to me. When I asked him about the tomb again, he told me about the legend of Tin Hanan, the mother of us all. An interesting story in its own right, but I can't help feeling there's more. Later that evening, we uncovered a passage beneath the dunes leading to a sand-covered stone structure. The professor was confident it was the tomb we sought and ordered the others to clear the way late into the dark, cold night. Tomorrow, I shall lead the men into the ancient structure, hoping to reach the burial chamber. No matter what the professor is keeping from me, the dig should yield something interesting to take back to London and the British Museum.
As good a reason as any, I suppose. Go digging around in the dirt of Africa. Well now, given that we have had no particular... Oh, hey. Ah, yes. Man, I need to go back and watch that playthrough. I remember that being quite a humorous piece he had there, but it's been so long, the memory's properly decayed away. I think that was a whole bit he had going, just like the box. Whatever here. Oh, one that's not voice acted for a change. Okay. That is a good gameplay feature. If you are trying to convey your... If you're trying to convey your story predominantly through bound materials, lost information, things that are left behind, like text logs, audio logs, things of the sort, having them in some way being marked as a piece of the story's progress, that's a fine... will demarcate what you necessarily need and what's merely icing on the cake. A nice bit of proper progress versus a nice little bit of lore. Lessons learned. I guess since I've already been doing this all day, I'll do the reading here. I hereby offer my full attention and services to Alexander, Baron of Brandenburg. Huh, okay. This contract will reign for a total of 3 years, but my freedom shall return to me. In addition, Alexander, Baron of Brandenburg is to recommend my services at the Prussian royal court and within the sanctum of the Order of the Black Eagle. May no man break the seal. Wilhelm, House of Garage. Alright. Well. I should probably stop using so much oil. Buffet the chair away. Hey! Hard to believe we're using a whole tinderbox for everything we might light. But c'est la vie. Been playing a bit of Baldur's Gate 3 recently, and seeing every one of these paintings by instinct is immediately to just snatch them up, sell them on the market. Excuse me. Come on now.
17th of May, 1839. My hands tremble as I write. I feel a need to document my tribulation, for I fear that my memory will fail me if I linger. Today, I took some men and ventured into the dark, ancient passage we uncovered. Our torches burned faintly in the murky air as we slowly made our way underground. The men were superstitious and fearful. They argued loudly, and I felt their strange language getting to me. I mustered my strength and yelled at them to continue down the slopes and broken steps. The crudely carved passage confused me. It looked much older than the 4th century structure we had expected. The twisting path emerged into a great antechamber. The walls were lined with statues unlike any I'd ever seen. Despite their unearthly quality, I felt a strange familiarity toward them, which haunts me still. At the far end of the chamber, a great slab of stone sealed off whatever lay ahead. I gave the order to raise it, and as I pushed through the narrow space, the heavy stone suddenly dropped, sealing me inside. I was trapped.
A whole line dedicated to I was trapped. Alright, fair, I guess. I feel like there's going to be a secret on one of these bookshelves with a sliding door that I'm 1,000,000% going to miss. Just by virtue of not pulling all of them. It's a good impression to leave the player with if you're trying to get them to consider all of the various... Okay then. All of the various actions that you would hope of them. Oh, I appreciate that effect. I suppose those are... Okay. Ah, a little bit of auto-logging. I appreciate that. I am swiftly running out of oil. No. Stay open. I would have loved it if it just slammed back down again. Like, no. I don't think so. Bingo wrong. We really never just consider hopping out of the window to get out of here, huh? And that's one of those gamey tropes that I've always appreciated. You know what? I can see your point. Oh, they finally modeled the ceiling having damage. Congratulations, we moved up in things. Albeit with a bit of a leak issue. Hang on, let me see if I'm a vampire. Ah! Nope, sanity's still dropping. Man, what a shame. Could have had a real coming to Dracula moment. What do we have here? Plank of scrolls. Oh, okay. More. Oh, I can just double click it. Nice. I hope using up all of more cave-ins. I guess that would be the reality. Well, ain't no going back that way. All right. Said we're from Mayfair, London. Map suppression. Maybe some significance to it. Just... Did I? All right, nap time. Oh, I have agency again. Okay. I love it when I can get faked out like that. Can I step off the path? Does anything happen? Ooh. Okay. Just slows every movement towards that direction down. Oh no, it slows movement in general. The connotations of that motion in and of itself is dependent on this?
Enclosed in dark nothingness, I felt myself drawn to the mystic light.
It supposes quite some significance.
I
Alright.
reached reached out, closing it in my hands.
Pick up the orb, put it in your
The
mind.
escaped from my fingers and began to spark brightly and spirit me away, unlocking alien memories of spiraling towers, endless deserts, and impossible geometry. The next thing I can remember is the grating sound of stone being lifted, the voices of the Arabs pulling me to safety, and grasped firmly in my hands was the broken pieces of a most peculiar relic.
Well, good to know we are playing a wizard. Or a mystic, at least.
Much of the castle is old and hasn't been tended to for centuries. When the shadow arrives, it won't take long until things start falling apart.
We're just buying time anyway. Let's do what we can.
There isn't much to be done about the walls. We should reinforce weak structures. The ground will tremble and there's a risk everything will cave in on us, especially downstairs. Here, and there. Let's get the servants working on it.
That'll do. The shadow. So this reality-eating nightmare.
Swift. When you activate the first one, you hear that? If it stops, you'll have to start over.
Isn't all this a bit excessive?
You can never be too careful, Daniel.
It's clearly not just some abstract. I should have done that earlier. I'm going to think about how I missed that throughout the entire game now. Allstadt and Brennenburg Castle 1801. Another region rich with lore is Allstadt, deep within the East Prussian woods. For centuries there have been stories surrounding the hamlet and its neighbor, Castle Brennenburg. The quiet forest-clad mountains dressed with scattered lakes is as picturesque as can be, albeit the area is haunted by the dark. Ask any local and you will hear proof of the widespread superstition. All travelers should indulge themselves in such conversations, since it will certainly serve as exciting entertainment. All of them have their own twists on the tales, but there are some motifs that keep reappearing. The Gatherers. The story reaches all the way back to the time of 30 Years' War. It is said that soldiers who abandoned their duty got lost in the cold, dark woods and were forever damned to roam the grounds. Their bodies, wrought by their tainted souls, have left them disfigured and empty of essence. Many have cited them over the years and described them as horrid revenants. They move silently through the woods, shying away from any road. They are called Gatherers, as they seem to follow some ambition to steal living creatures. It is their prey which can be heard struggling inside damp burlap sacks dragged behind them, which reveal their presence, a dark scheme to follow. Visit Undone. I love a perfectly equivocal name. It leaves so much to the imagination, especially when you've got the right couching, as we've got here, the perfect substrate to suggest something of grave significance and yet leave it ambiguous enough for the player to fill in the blanks. Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, the well-known erudite, visited Allstadt at the start of the 16th century. He resided in the local inn for a fortnight as he looked for remnants of kingdoms past. During his stay, all the prominent members of society paid notice, and he is mentioned in many records of the time. One day he went to investigate a burrow in the northwest glades, only to never be seen again. Heinrich is known to have passed away in Grenoble some 10 years later. He dismissed the notion of ever visiting Allstadt, which makes you wonder what really happened. Who was the mysterious man who visited the sleepy hamlet in the woods, and what happened to him? mortal baron. The Baron of Brennenburg lives a reclusive life with his family at his castle nearby, Hallstatt, and like most of noble birth, rumors are inherited alongside with the title. Researching the history reveals little before the castle was consumed by fire in the late 16th century. It was rebuilt by Alexander, a nobleman from the Rhinelands, claiming the role as protector of the Prussian state. Alexander helped the region to flourish and remained popular throughout his presumed lifetime. The family has always been secretive when it comes to lineage and heritage. Therefore, the birth and death of Alexander and his offspring has never been fully recorded. This has fed the idea that the Baron is in fact the one and the same who came from the west over 300 years ago, lived through the time of occupation, and joined the coveted Order of the Black Eagle along with the great leaders of his country. This is something you see often going overlooked, that titles, whether they be of antiquity as we see here, or something a little bit more contemporary, modernistic, they all imply certain features and characteristics by virtue of their history, that there is a causal chain connecting every individual, whether they are the originators of such ascriptions and annotations to their personhood or not, will come with direct implications. And while we think of these very often in strictly concrete material terms today, you need look no further than titles such as Imperator, Justicar, Judge, Honor, Noble, and so on, to see that there is implication built directly in to the explicit utterances, articulations of social position, not just in hierarchy, but in mythos too. But in the mythos too. The narrative that enshrouds such. As far as what that means for what we've been playing through so far, that puts quite the twist on circumstances. We're dealing with genuine, bona fide magic. Well, I guess that's not the way. More of that. Hello? And a group of creatures, perhaps intelligent, that serve something in correlation to it. The Gatherers. Which is dandy and all, but how, pray tell, am I to abscond from here? I know that's not the way. And I doubt a game of this time would softlock me. Did I truly miss something? Ah. That was the hint. Having to start over. Okay. Fair dues. Which of these books? There we go. I do enjoy a good puzzle. I should probably recall to be more conservative with the lantern. regarding closing of the wine cellar. Wilhelm and his fools have endangered my research long enough with their absent-minded handling of the human vessels. The sheriff is keeping a watchful eye on the force and is killing my trusty servants. It's just a matter of time until they follow the trail to Brennenburg. I need to lock Wilhelm and his men up to avoid further investigation from the public. The wine cellar will therefore be sealed off until the matter has been handled. Either the king's men leave or they will starve. Whatever comes first, they can rot for all I care. Maybe I'll feed them some wine. Would in a sense solve both of my problems. If this is Daniel's castle, he is sure going quite some distance for vessels? Was that for real? There's just enough movement in every environment to suppose that there might be something there. That takes quite a concerted balance to be stricken. Especially if the foundational premise of your gameplay mechanics is that of tension. Okay, so that was a real deal. The Gatherers, they're real. And I guarantee that's the way that I have to go to move forward, too. Well, definitely not that way. Although I wonder. Yeah, I was not so optimistic that that would work. Hello? Sounds like Chewbacca. Oh, but they do have panning on the audio done well. And I guess one of them plays piano, huh? Now, I've been through all of these areas. Maybe it's just a matter of backtracking. But I do feel as though I've forgotten something. Oh, what the fuck? Oh. Oh, I guess that's not actually dealing damage. I'm just squelching it. Yeah, okay. Oh, that is actually dealing damage. Alright, I guess I'll avoid the totally not necromorph goo. Well, I guess that precludes us from getting through there permanently. literal brain rot. The game knew what was up. Yeah, hooty doody doo to you too. I'm concerned about how far the fall damage might activate at. Now, I haven't saved so far. I should probably do that. Is there a simple save mechanic? Because I haven't seen one so far. On to the laboratory. These spiders have been at work. Aha! I knew there'd be something up about there. Yuck. Well, I guess they weren't kidding about all of the, bits that were to be employed. That does also give some The flies being there does grant some explanation for all of the spider's webs spread all over the area, which directly correspond to all the piles of viscera and these crawling isopods? Whoever was directing the level design clearly had some creative vision in mind, and has executed it quite well. Chemical relocation. The lack of a chimney to properly vent the fumes from my most recent experiments has taken its toll on many of my less stable ingredients and storage, and I'll do that. Some seems unaffected, but many are stained by the fumes and would be difficult to salvage. I shall do what I can to move them to the wine cellar. Well, that yet does not quite explain why all of the viscera is everywhere. What up? Splish splash, I was standing over a bath. Got a sneaking sensation.
There should be more cooperite. Let me see. And one part aquaforce.
One day I'll return. If it wasn't for the thought of you, my love, I wouldn't be able to go on. When I find myself doing terrible things, I take comfort in you. As long as I am able to think of you and long for a life together, I know I'm better than the others. I weep for them. They lust for power without restraint, where I only crave fair judgment and a safe return. What is that? Oh, I guess we can go back to the spirit realm. Alright. Ah, I see a mind flayer cylinder. Early alchemy experiment. This is my third attempt to produce artificial vitae. The former compounds lack the potency I need, but I sense I'm close. Calamine and orpiment are given and the cupright binds them well. This time I will attempt aqua regia instead of aqua fortis in hope it will produce a more even solution. The experiment was unsuccessful. The solution is highly acidic and proves impractical to put to any use except as a detergent. Organic tissue reacts especially violently to the solution and should be handled with the greatest care. I might be able to use the recipe, but I'm losing hope that I will find an alchemic solution to my predicament. Well, if you're using aqua regia, absolutely. For those who might not know, aqua regia, if I recall rightly, is one of the strongest acids that you can produce with classical chemistry. Quite a potent solvent. Is that all? This feeling of missing something, which I do admire. Does not quite leave one in want, per se. But it does absolutely leave one. With a sense of wonder at the circumstance.
What is this place?
Reflecting on it, I do think that that might be one of the reasons I tend to favor older games more than contemporary ones. With games that are not sufficiently old as to be completely abstruse. And more experimental than given any kind of practical play. The sense of wanting, that which compels, because it is not giving you the fullest story to the face. The introduction. There is genuine mystique about such a thing. And we can see this in BioShock, Hitman Contracts, even Dead Space. We see that in juxtaposition against games like Doom, to a greater extent, as I was referring to earlier, Baldur's Gate 3, and even certain more friendly games of the past like Pac-Man, as we played as our first game. Where they elected not quite to hold one's hand, where these elect not quite to hold one's hand, those offer fair guidance the whole way through. Not as a bid per se for accessibility, this game, along with the others I've mentioned, are very accessible by their very nature. Yet they obviate everything, where these remain more markedly obscure. These bother to venture forth with a character of their own. Rather than providing familiarity. Ah, I did grab the key. Housekeeping. Well, at least it let me get... It stops responding every time it begins to load. But at least it let me get my thought out while I took stock of the rest of the place. Hmm.
Where did the Baron go?
Who cares? He left us enough wine to last us a lifetime. Or at least until tomorrow.
Those books are getting uppity. What have we here? Or are they rocks? I wonder if the AI is wise enough to note that naturally, a place with new lit lanterns, or I should say torches, is probably a place where the guy's hiding. There's the ornament. I think I cleared the place. That's quite a double-edged sword there. If I light up a place, that leaves me significantly less opportunity to hide. But it does drain my sanity quite fiercely. Well, that is certainly enough wine for a lifetime. My agency, it's returned to me. Ooh, nice. Yeah, I might have been a little oil to that, but that's plenty for me. I don't think I'll necessarily need a place to hide in here. Let's see if I can find my way to the top. Can I rotate? Maybe. I don't think that'll be enough, though. Nope, absolutely not. I suppose those boxes would do. That's certainly not going to work. Well, that won't either if I do that. Can I... Too complex. Trying to deal with that geometry would be like pulling teeth. There we go. I'd just like to remark on the fact that these are some crooked boxes. I don't know how they managed to get such relatively ornate furniture out of everything else, and yet they can't put some simple storage crates together. It's kind of goofed up. Yeah. Oh. Oh, this isn't even a way out. I think. Nope, I suppose that was just a massive waste of time. Well, in that case... That really is just enough to do it, huh? Alright, cool. Oh, it did the rest of the work for me. That feels quite natural. You're sliding along the ground. Can't help but admire it. That will need some bashing. Alright, that should suffice. It's good to know we can properly barricade ourselves in a room at least, if needs be. No. I'm just gonna set this up here in case I need it. I hope that'll suffice. At least that's old blood by the looks of it. Yeah, that'll do it in. Wilhelm's last words. My name is Wilhelm, House of Garrick. These are my final words, my confession and testament. 2 years ago, I was summoned to the castle Brennenburg. As most of the aristocracy, I was curious about what this supposed knight of order would want from me and could want from me and accepted the invitation. The Baron was friendly and offered me a proposition. It dawned on me that the nature of the contract was sordid, and that the reason I was chosen was because of the follies of my past and not the honors I've been rewarded with during my time as a soldier. I was to kidnap healthy humans upon his slightest whim, and to do so without asking questions. In return, he would attest to my character at the royal court, advancing my position within noble society. I would like to claim that I struggled with my decision, but it came swiftly, and I accepted wholeheartedly. And ever since that day, I've brought men, women, and children to Brennenburg. I can't remember the numbers, but there were many, perhaps even 100, none of whom were ever seen or heard from again. Tonight, the Baron invited me and my men down to the wine cellar to celebrate our work. I had my suspicions as we descended the stairs, but he insisted and joined us in a toast. The wine tasted fine, and my men drank without restraint. So begins the punishment for our sins. The Baron has locked us up and returned upstairs. Forgive me for what I have done. I was weak and fell into his diabolic ways. My men are screaming. Their skin has been pierced by their own tangled bones. I feel my insides revolt against their God-given nature. Blood has begun to pour from my eyes, and I can no longer. Well, no, I'd say probably not, all considered. Oh, there's more of that purple liquid. Or violet, I should say. Hadn't even taken note. I'm sorry, is there something in the gore pile that I'm to do? I'm glad there's a squish gore button. That's certainly what we needed. But it would have appeared earlier that our fellow soldier was perfectly in accordance with the benefit of Brennan. And yet, he is regarded as simply one of the king's men. Alright, well, I guess I'll just eat some damage then. That's fine, I suppose. No, oh, okay. Ah, okay. I believe the laboratory is still down here. Good for us, but what can you do? Simply regarded as one of the king's men by Brennan. Someone's not telling the full truth. And this Brennan guy... I'm inclined to trust anybody. It's not the mystic. It'd be nice to have a doorway. Apparatus. I assume this is it. Okay. How do I get him in then? I guess just gesturing one of these bottles is more than sufficient to get it in. Man, we really are a magician of high skill. What have we here? Well, that's our way back. I guess we'll have to find a new one. Burner? I guess that's it. I hope that didn't just waste all of them. Nope, okay. Container. I suppose any will do, huh? Ah! Should have known. Is there not? Alright, just anywhere will do. And around we go! Chemistry. Alright, let's drink the glowing green Mountain Dew. Go. Ah, yes. Nothing quite like it. We have come here to do the do. It just so happens that this is on Mount Doom. I can make that, I guarantee it. Yep. Alright, never mind. Yep. Nope. No, okay. Well, I guess that's my hopes dashed. At least that way. Getting through there, I think. Even if I threw stuff at it. I'm going to feel like quite the right fool if I go through the effort of building this up and then it's still not the way. It's a fair sight less complex. Maybe so. It's over in Algiers. Man, that's a rash you should really get checked out. I'm telling you. That is straight up lethal. Okay, well. Acid! Ah, yes. The abilities of a cantrip. Given the frequency of traversing these various areas,
It sure is dark in here.
Yes, and there's a good reason for it. But you can light the lamp now if you wish.
What's the reason for the darkness, that is?
Stay close. Be careful not to stray.
What's the reason? Why is it so dark?
Pay attention, Daniel. It's important that you keep going straight and make make sure not to stray.
Righto. Given the frequency of traversing through various areas, and that each has set pieces that they rely upon to convey all of the information, having scraps of lore drop in the interstices whenever you're moving from set piece, whenever you're moving from room to room through doors, does well to maintain pacing. Whereas so many games horror games especially end up being a slog by virtue of the fact that they don't have enough content besides ambling through more or less dimly lit spaces. That, like proper kindling, timber, keeps things at an even lighting.
22nd of June, 1839. It's been more than a month since my last entry. After the event inside the underground chamber in Algeria, Professor Herbert insisted I return to England. He said he didn't want to risk forfeiting the entire expedition lest I took a turn for the worse. An excessive decision, in retrospect. But I'm glad it turned out that way. I found my journal this morning in the haphazard collection of things brought home from Africa. Next to it lay the broken stone orb wrapped in cloth. I tried to assemble it, but couldn't. The pieces wouldn't fit together, as if they weren't from the same object. Could I have imagined it all? Was there ever a complete orb?
Well, we'll see about that.
June 1839. I feel the need to continue this journal, even though it was intended for my journey to Africa. This must be something very important. I just know it. I've taken it upon myself to piece the orb back together, but it's been more difficult than one might think. The pieces are behaving strangely. They seem to change color, shape, and texture, but ever so slightly. Yesterday, I took careful measurements and notated any significant markings. Today, I confirmed my suspicions. They were changing. I was terrified and rushed off to see the finest geologist in London, Sir William Smith. I approached the subject with care, and we discussed how rocks change form. He told me about the nature of glass, how it eventually collapses on itself, like ice slowly melting over the course of centuries. Smith eased my mind a bit, but I can't escape the feeling that these shards have otherworldly properties.
I don't know what glass he's ever experienced, but it's not the same kind of glass I know of. Yeah, give us a second. Okay. Alright. Hold your hands over the candle flame and, you know, count your blessings. It's not that big of a deal. Come on, lad. Stare into the light of the candle. That ghosting effect is phenomenal. Look, dude, it's alright. I promise. What if I light this candle, too? Will that help? Oh, drastically! Wow, looky there. All it took was a nicely lit room. What do we got? Yeah, that ain't good. Alright, well. Gonna have to... Ah, there we go. All is good indeed. All it took was a bit of laudanum. Now, what can we do for the mind? Would be an improvement that we had. Improving? No, I don't think so. Our brain's a bit rotty, innit? That's the way back. That's something that I should have taken note of before. The candles themselves are acting as something of a marker for where we've been. An indicator as to whether the places we've traversed have been cleared or not. Hell. Ah. Convenient. Away with thee. Nice. Not those. That'll definitely be in my way. Come on now. I was sure that would have been a lid of some description. What am I supposed to... Looks pretty clear to me. I'd hope this isn't a glitch of some description. Will that do? Just spin the hell out of it. Alright. Huh. Maybe I just need something heavier. Oh! That'll do. Someone's been through here. I notice the air itself is getting red. That's, not the most, kindly indication. No going back now. That's not friendly. Good to know we got a watery stalker of some description. Can I distract you, though? It surely looks like it. Nope, nope, nope. Whoo! You were just right on my heels, aren't you? Ah, yeah, that ain't good. Nope. How about you, go that away, eh? Gotta get to that room. Oh, boy. Yeah, that's, Well, this is trialsome. Nope, get. Over there. Shit. First-person platforming is just not my favorite, if I'm being honest. Over there. Yeah. What? Was the only benefit getting the laudanum? Surely not. Oh, hell. Glad I have that. There has been nothing that's indicated saving so far. I really, really hope that this is not going to come to a sour end. In fact, let me double check to make sure that there's not a button that I'm supposed to be hitting. Let's see. Ah, okay. It saves at every door. Okay. Thanks, fellas. Well, I think we're probably going to get through this section. Get. And then call it a day, because it's been a very good one. Gotten a great sum of progress on all fronts. Well, that would perhaps be the opening mechanism we encountered earlier. Hiccups. Not the best time to have it when precision is key. Albeit with fairly forgiving margins. Go get. Thank you. When the floor isn't lava, but it's watery. And a watery grave at that. That thing's gonna follow me through, isn't it? No, but that will. Ah, yes, our distracting torso. Newest model, highest quality. Oh, it feeds. That'll keep it for a while, methinks. Oh, hell. This is not a grand position to be in. Right. Go that away. Have some food. Okay, well that was just a total waste of resources. Oh, turn. Oh, come on. Turn, baby, turn. Go, 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 go. Oh no, that's death. Maybe not. We don't get some more lamp oil, that's certainly coming for us. Of course. Shit. Don't bounce me into the water, if you would. Oh yeah, that's dead. We're dead. I'm a goner. There is no coming back from that one. How about you have a snack, huh? Oh, come on. Simple lock. Well, there's the hollow needle. Go, 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 go. Woo! Okay. That was punishing. And it does not leave us in the best of circumstances either. But at least it's not that one. Well, I cannot afford the luxury of letting the background noises play. Well, maybe. If this light will keep us sane enough to keep going to the end. Alright, cool. So, we have just enjoyed our time, our first peek into Amnesia, the Dark Descent, and my goodness. Following up Dead Space, this does not disappoint by any means, even the fact given that it is from 2010, one of the OGs, at least as far as I ever known, of the horror first-person genre. It has maintained phenomenal sound layering, motion layering in the background, which is something that could have been worked on with Dead Space, although it did put more pronouncement upon the audio. Has maintained an authentic feeling, antiquity aesthetic, and is weaving a very intriguing story about not just the morality of digging around in African dunes, but also the cost of life being used as a means to an end, rather than an end upon itself. I look forward to the next. But we should then go ahead and close out. I thank you all for enjoying here today, Victor's Descent. If you liked the video, please feel free to check out the rest of my channel, like, subscribe, do all the things of that nature, share it around. If you want to see more of it, you can always check us out on X, Instagram, BitChute, or TikTok. We have finally got all those updated and caught up to the present release schedule. And if you think it might be worth a little bit of your hard-earned coin, then feel free to visit the links below to Stream Elements or Patreon. If you visit our Patreon, you can join us for a low cost. You can join us for the merest cost at proponent tier of $5 per month. With that, you'll get your name put on the end of every long-form piece of content, like this stream here. Be able to participate in polls for the channel to see which direction we might go into. You'll have access to a members-only area in our Discord server, the Threefold Edifactory. And, of course, you get all of our content in one neat, tidy area, along with perhaps a few extra goodies. But with that all being said, and beyond all of that, I hope that you never miss your opportunities.